in the last lesson, we multiplied two binomial factors. So in this case, that's one binomial right there. That's another right there. And we multiplied those together. And what we ended up every time with was a trinomial 1, 2, 3, a trinomial factor or product. So these are your factors. That's your product. That's your answer, right? And we noticed a couple patterns when we did this. If we added the constants from the binomials, so for instance, 2 plus 3, right? If I did 2 plus 3, that gave me the coefficient for my middle term, the 5. And if we multiply them, 2 times 3, that gave me the constant for my trinomial. That gave me the 6. And we noticed it worked every single time that we did this, right? So down here, if I take negative 5 plus 1, negative 5 plus 1, sure enough, is negative 4, right? And I'll just write that. If I multiply them, negative 5 times 1, that's negative 5, which sure enough is the constant for that trinomial. So using those two patterns is how we're going to be able to work backwards in factors. So remember, moving in this direction, we multiplied. But today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working backwards from the trinomial to the binomials, and then going in that direction is what we call factoring. And the reason we call it factoring is because we're looking for what were the factors that we multiplied together originally to get our product. So keep in mind those patterns, right? That's all we're using. We're using those patterns. So I'm looking at this trinomial right away. The first thing I notice is that I see a trinomial, right? I see 3 terms and I think, oh, we must have multiplied some binomials together to get that. So the first thing where I'm going to start is I'm going to say, okay, well, we must have multiplied 2 numbers together that got me negative 14. I'm always going to start with this constant. I'm always going to start here. Like, what did we multiply together to get that? Okay? And remember, it is negative, so I must have had different signs. So maybe I multiplied 1 times negative 14, or maybe I multiplied negative 1 times a positive 14. Maybe I multiplied a 7 times a negative 2, or a negative 7 times a 2, right? And so right now I'm listing everything you can think of. As you get better and better, you won't have to list them all. You'll probably be able to jump right to the one that is going to work. Okay, but now the question is, which of these, right? Which of these adds to positive 5? Because remember, the other pattern that we noticed was that if I add my 2 numbers, I'm going to get positive 5. So I'm going to just look through here and, oh, I noticed that 7 plus negative 2 gives me 5. And remember, if I had chosen negative 7 and 2, they would multiply to negative 14, but they would add to negative 5. And I don't want negative 5, I want positive 5. Okay? So the numbers I'm going to use in my binomials are the 7 and negative 2. So now all I do is I'm going to just write my little brackets, my parentheses. I know each started with an x, right? Because that's how I got my x squared. And then so I'm just going to plug in the 7's positive, so I'm going to put plus 7, and I'm going to put negative 2. And so this is your answer. Those are the factors, right? That's one, and that's the other factor. That if we multiply them together, we'll get this trinomial. And we can test that, right? We can do it just like we did the other day. We can say, well, let me distribute the x across. So x times x and x times negative 2. We'll start there. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 2 is negative 2x. And then don't forget I have to distribute the 7. So 7 times x is positive 7x. And then 7 times negative 2 is negative 14. So the last step here is I just have to combine these like terms right here. And so I end up with x squared, negative 2x plus 7x is plus 5x minus 14. So now let's check. X squared, yep. 5x, yep. Negative 14, yep. And we did it all by looking at those patterns. Let's do 2 more. So this one, factor x squared minus 9x plus 18. Again, I am always going to start here. I want to know what pairs of numbers can I multiply together to get 18? Well, I could do 1 times 18. And again, I'm doing positives right here, so I'm just going to throw out a couple. So 1 times 18. I could do 3 times 6. I could do 9 times 2. I don't know why I wrote that backwards, but that's okay. So any of those are going to get me 18. The problem is, when I go to ask myself, which of these pairs adds 2, and in this case, I need a negative 9. Negative 9. And the answer, obviously, is none of them. Because if I add 1 and 18, I get 19. 3 and 6 is 9. 9 and 2 is 11, right? None of them are going to add to a negative number. So what's going on here? Well, what we need to remember is that there's two ways you can multiply together to get a positive. You could have two positives, but you could also have two negatives. So for instance, I could multiply negative 1 times negative 18, and that would give me a positive 18. I could multiply negative 3 and negative 6 and get positive 18. Or I could multiply negative 9 and negative 2, and that would still get me negative 18 when I multiply. So now I'm looking at these pairs, and I want to know which of those pairs adds up to negative 9, and I can see that it's this, negative 3 and negative 6. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to write my binomials and pop those in. So I'm going to have two brackets. I'm going to have x minus 3 and x minus 6. Those are my factors. And to check, to make sure that I got it right, I'm just going to distribute. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 6 is negative 6x. So let's start writing those. So it's x squared minus 6x. And then the negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Negative 3 times negative 6 is positive 18. And that's sort of the trick right there to remember your signs, right? Negative times negative is still a positive. So I'm just going to combine these middle terms. So I have x squared, I have 9 negative x's plus 18. And sure enough, I have x squared, which I got by multiplying these x's. I have negative 9x. I have positive 18. So we know that we did it right. We can check to make sure we factored it correctly. But just remember, this is actually your answer. Your answer is what were the factors, that binomial and that binomial. Those were the factors that if we multiply them together will give us this trinomial for a product. Let's do one more. Okay, so you should know by now the process, right? What am I doing first? The first thing I'm doing is I'm looking for pairs of numbers that multiply to 32. So I'm always just going to write, and I mean, I'm not always going to write, but to start, we can always write down 1 times 32, right? Just start to get the juices flowing, right? Get that idea going. So 1 times 32. I can do 2 times 16. And now notice what I'm doing in the back of my mind is I'm thinking as I go, which of these is going to add to 12? So I know that's not going to add to 12. 2 and 16 is 18. That's not going to add to 12. But that's what I'm thinking as I'm going. So I could do 4 times 8. And I'm thinking right now, bingo, 4 times 8. If I add those together, 4 plus 8 is 12. So that's going to be my pair. So I'm going to stop when I get what I'm looking for. I'm not going to keep going. So right now I'm going to do this. Put my x's in. I know it's always going to look like that. And since they're both positive, I have a plus 4. I have a plus 8. Those are my factors. And I'm going to check my answer by distributing. So x times x is x squared. X times 8 is positive 8x. 4 times x is positive 4x, and 4 times 8 is positive 32. Last thing, combine these like terms. So you have 4x, that's 12x. So 12x plus your 32, and x squared, 12x, 32. You get exactly the same thing you started with because the factors that you chose, x plus 4 and x plus 8, were correct. And that is that. So today we're working backwards from the trinomial using the patterns we remember to get our two binomial factors. And the patterns that you got to focus on are the numbers we're looking for, the 4 and the 8, the numbers we're looking for are going to multiply to get you the 32, and they'll add up to get you the 12.